In this tutorial we're going to have a look at mixing some EDM drums along with some bass. Now in the previous tutorials we've kind of used these tracks that are in this session to kind of explain a bit of pre-mix preps type strategies. We've kind of color-coded everything, we've done a bit of pre-routing already, we've put these hi-hats into a bus, into a track stack submix, same for the top loops, for the crashes as well. Same for some of the sound effects for the mid basses and the acid bass layer. I've left the sub on its own as well as the kick, snare and clap, and I'm just going to start off now looking at the kick around this bassline entry. I'm only choosing this section of the project because most of the drums are in by that point, with the exception of the ride that comes in halfway through. So we're just going to focus on the kick drum to start with, and I'm going to use this PFL button up here. Again, look through some of the previous tutorials to find out about customizing this section of the interface, and I can see that these tracks have been normalized. You can kind of see it on the waveform overviews. It's clear as day that they're all jacked up to the nines and absolutely smashed in terms of volume. So if I want to do any processing, if I want to do any additive EQ or any compression, etc., everything's going to be coming in really hot and really hard. So the first thing I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to highlight the region, go over to the inspector, and I'm going to put -6 dB in there to drop the gain down a touch. So now that the kick drum is gone down 6 dB, it's going to become a little bit more workable, a bit more usable. I'm going to do the same for the snare and the clap. I'm going to just highlight them both and drop them down maybe 9 dB, because I will do some saturation processing to those. So for the kick, I'm just going to turn that back to post fader metering, and I'm going to get my peak level to be around about -18 dB, something like that. And I'm going to mix everything up towards that kind of level. So the kick sound is quite good by default. Let's have a little look at its frequency analyzer there. We can see that the fundamental is going to be around 42 Hz, something like that. So it's already pretty bassy. I've got this ricochet down there in the high frequencies, giving it some of the snap to it. So I'm going to send it off to a bus. I'm just going to mute that for a sec. I'm going to drive that up, and I'm going to add in a compressor here, and I'm going to add in some parallel compression to beef out the kick drum a little bit more. Change it to this studio FET version, and take off auto gain, going to take off auto release. I'm going to have the attack set to about 10 milliseconds. I'm going to have the release set to around 80. I'm going to have the ratio at kind of 10:1, kind of brick wall limiting style, and I'm going to pull the threshold right down so that each kick definitely triggers a high level of compression. I'm going to turn this down a sec, and I'm going to relabel this kick para. I'm going to put the soft clipping distortion mode as well onto it. We should be able to hear that it's added quite a bit of weight to the kick. I'm also going to take out a little bit of some of those extreme lows. I'm going to create a track in the workspace area by highlighting this auxiliary track and pressing Ctrl and T, and that brings it up here. I'm going to color code that maybe pink. I'm going to send both of those out to a summing stack. And that's going to be my kick submix. So that I can do further processing to both the original sound, the parallel compressed sound together up on this section when it comes to looking about shaping some of the intro sections there. I'm going to filter out some of the lows so it kicks in on this bar here after the first 16 bars of drums, plus that sort of 4 bar of pre-intro stuff for the sound effects. Next thing I'm going to do is have a little look at the snare, and I can turn that up a touch. Have a look at that pre-fade level. Still coming in with quite a bit of headroom. So I'm going to turn on my overdrive. I'm going to go into my EQ. Oops. I'm going to drive up the resolution so we can see that there's a lot of dirt in there that we don't need. Like most things under 100 I'm not going to need in that snare sample. Same with at the very top end. There's a lot of hi-hats and percussions and stuff in here, so I'm not really going to need too much above 10k really in the snare sound itself. I've got this clap sound here that I'm going to add both a bit of overdrive to, and some sample delay. Take advantage of the Haas effect here. I'm not going to have the left and right channels linked. I'm just going to have one channel offset by a few, well, less than 2,000 samples, which means the whole stereo image is kind of pseudo widened. And I'm going to put some EQ at the end here to get rid of, again, the stuff I don't need at the extreme lows. With this, because the snare is going to take care of a lot of the stuff from kind of 200 Hz up to about a K, I don't really need much below that. And similarly, I've got some hi-hats that are going to be taking up most of the frequency spectrum above 10k. In fact, maybe let's push that cut-off frequency a little higher but turn the slope up so we don't have much above kind of 12k there. And drop the clap sound down a touch. I'm going to create another submix. Create my snare and clap submix as well. Now I don't really need to compress to control the dynamics of either the claps or the snares, or the kicks for that matter. The parallel compression is to add weight, not to control the peaks of the signal. We can see that's completely uniform amplitude both there and for the snares and the claps. So I don't really need to worry about adding compression to tame anything. It's all going to be to add character really. But I'm not going to do that level of compression until I've got a few more tracks in the mix. Next I'm going to bring in my hi-hats. I'm going to bring them in one at a time. Pan one left. Pan the other one to the right a touch. come back to looking at panning in more detail later on. But just so I know what I'm working with there, I'm just going to take an EQ to get rid of some of this stuff that I certainly don't need in the sound. Only bats are going to hear that stuff above 15k. That's a very tight sounding signal, even though it doesn't have much low end in. I'm just going to get rid of absolutely everything I'm not really needing as part of the signal. I'm going to do the same for the hats, or the second set of hats I should say. And again, I'm just going to get rid of all that kind of gump there that we don't really need. And same at the kind of top end. Turn that left one up a bit louder. Do the same sort of processing for the open hi-hat. Here, it has lost a bit of character with some of that low frequency content stuff. In and around 500 Hz is kind of useful to the character of the tone there, so I'm not going to go really high and take this up to sort of 1-2k. I'm going to leave this back with an 18 dB slope, so some of that stuff there does contribute to the sound. Let's drop the level a touch. Open up the ride section. And again, in a similar way, we can see that there's a lot of dirt down there that we don't really need, so I'm going to force that up to about just under 2k. Again, I'm going to just get rid of everything above 15k for that ride. And a good little barometer for understanding whether you're kind of helping or hurting, or whether something's too loud or too quiet, is kind of muting it and unmuting it quite quickly to see. Now that open hi-hat is still quite loud. Do you really notice it when it disappears? Do you notice it a lot with that ride? So again, that can probably come down a touch. I'm probably going to add a bit of sidechain compression to the hi-hats, maybe the ride, to make them pump in time with the kick. So you can do this by adding in just a regular compressor, turning the sidechain on to be fed from a particular audio track, a bus, an instrument, or an input. But I have a kind of auto sidechain compressor here by Shaper Box. It's called Volume Shaper, and it's a multiband sidechain compressor. Basically, it automatically draws in this volume envelope based at where the frequency that you split the signal. So I've got it at about 250 Hz, something around about that. So that anything that's really low end I can get out completely out the way of the kick drum. Anything that's a bit higher I can just duck it down by sort of 7-8 dB and get it to pump in time with the music. Let's turn on just the kick drum and the hi-hats together. I'm going to add that to that other hi-hat part there as well. It's just going to help pump those two tiny bit with that kick drum. top is sticking out a little bit to me there. Pull both of those down a touch. Same with the hi-hats as well. I think early tools is quite easy to do quite a lot of cyclical kind of edits, tweaks and changes, because there's not much in your mix to start with. So you're going to try and push the levels of stuff a little bit higher than they need to be and come back to other things when there's new elements added. And that will become really relevant when we start looking at these top loops, these percussion loops here, these 5 tracks, because they have pretty much the full frequency content in them, from all the lowest of the lows to the highest of the highs, and everything in between is kind of contained within those samples. So let's just have a little look at these in isolation. We'll just start with the lowest one. It's got quite a wide sound to it, quite a deep sound. You can see that there is quite a lot of differentials between the left and right channel in that EQ overlay, that frequency analyzer. That white line and that red line are for the frequency levels of the left and right channel respectively, and usually in the low end we see this as a kind of uniform line until much later on where they start to diverge, but here it's got a lot of low frequencies that are quite stereo, which is going to be a little bit of a challenge and a problem later on, but there's some tools and tricks to kind of fix that sort of stuff. I'm going to get rid of everything above a K really. I'm probably going to dirty this up a touch as well. Put some low end compression in here. Take all those horrible auto features off. 2 to 1 should be okay. In fact, that's not too bad at all actually. Maybe a couple of dBs and makeup gain. Not usually chasing the top of that needle, but somewhere just a little bit below. We want to make up the kind of average RMS stealth side. We're not going for max detection, we're going for a sum detection rather than a max, so we put it in RMS mode really. So it's not going quite as high because we're looking at that average level that we're reducing. Again, maybe something like 20 milliseconds, it's quite fast. Up to maybe 160 milliseconds for release. That kind of pump there. Mix that. Next kind of low top loop in. And I'm actually going to add in some delay as an insert, but I'm going to add in a mono delay. So the echo plugin here doesn't have a left and right. It just has a mono delay rate for both channels. Just gonna add a little bit of rhythmic excitement there. Again, I can't get rid of anything that's too crazily low. I might put some distortion in between those plugins and drive that a touch. And add another EQ at the end, just in case I've added in some extra harmonics at the extreme lows by adding in that distortion. Again, I don't want to think I'm too high up in the frequency range because I've still got mid loops and some high loops as well. Let's see what's going on with those mids. Definitely some high frequencies that we're going to kind of get rid of. Get rid of everything below about 150, something like that. Again, I might just add some overdrive. I might even add the echo again. to an eighth note dotted. That's kind of sounding quite interesting. Finding that stereo section of that low track really distracting here actually. So I'm going to go to imaging, I'm going to go to direction mixer, and I'm going to use it in a split mode here, and I'm going to put a crossover in, and everything below 200 Hz I'm going to sum to mono, so everything will be bang in the middle there. You can hear how that changes it. Folds everything to mono below 200 Hz. So everything below there is kind of now monoed. I might even push that up to 400 Hz, maybe make the whole thing pretty much a mono sample. Maybe 300, 350, something like that. So put an EQ over the top of this. Get rid of some of those extreme lows again. Those highs. I might even get rid of some of that 2K stuff as well. Stuff around 4K that I want to tame a touch more. So, little pops on the left hand side, so that loop hasn't had any crossfades applied to it, so that could be a bit problematic if we've got that little ping in that left speaker each time. So let's have a if we put some more delay on it, maybe it will make it sound like it's something more percussive and supposed to kind of be there. I'm going to go for that eighth dotted note rhythm again. So the next thing I'm going to do is at the bus level, I'm going to add a little bit of glue compression. And again, I'm going to stick with the inbuilt Logic one, I think, just for now. There's no reason not to. I quite like this particular model. I think it's got quite a nice sound. I'm going to put that softer clip distortion on the output again. I'm going to give it about 160 milliseconds, and maybe at the bus level about 18 milliseconds of attack, 160 of release. I'm going to go slightly higher, maybe 3 to 1 ratio. I'm going to put the threshold up there, and I'm just going to look to aim to get between maybe 3 and 6 dBs of compression on this kind of grouped top loop percussion section. Something like that's quite good. Now, because I put the soft clipping in here, I don't even really need to use much makeup gain. They're kind of hitting leaving it roughly the same amplitude as it came in at. But it's just helped to glue those loops together a touch. But then again, on the top mix bus, I'm going to add in my auto sidechain compressor to make everything pump in time with the kick. So let's put that kick in with it. Without that sidechain compression, the track doesn't kind of feel quite as groovy, or doesn't quite have that same kind of cool funky feel. So I'm going to pull those, in fact I'm going to pull that top loop submix above a bus all the way down. I'm going to on-solo everything. I'm going to mix that in against all the other stuff that's there. So we've got quite a good grooving set of percussion now. So now we're going to have a little look at these crashes. Now for me that crash needs to definitely wash out, so I'm going to use some reverb here, but I'm not going to use it as a send because I don't want it to be necessarily shared. I mean, I could use it, it's probably going to be used on the crash to some extent, but I quite like Logic's inbuilt Silververb. It's quite a dirty, horrible sounding reverb in the most kind of wonderful way. So I'm going to turn the size of the room up, this virtual room, up to about 150. I guess that's square meterage, I don't know. I'm going to turn the reflectivity up. The density time is going to be 100%. I'm going to drop the dry down completely and just have the wet signal coming through. I'm going to keep that high cut down on the return so it's kind of a grungier, more of a lo-fi style reverb. I might bring some of the dry back in for that, maybe 35, 65, something like that. But that kind of horrible reverb can wash out afterwards. I kind of quite like that. And then maybe do something similar with the forwards crash. But maybe with this one, add in some delay, but this time it's going to be some stereo ping pong delay. And I'm going to use a third party plugin for this as well. I'm going to use Waves H delay. Put ping pong mode on. So a dotted eighth note. I'm going to pull the dry wet down. Something like that. I might put the filters back on that, and then I might just put a global EQ at the end of this to get rid of some rubbish that we're not going to need down here, and do the same for the reverse crash as well. Kind of thin that sound out. Let's hear that in the context of the drums. So that's sounding quite good. And because they're only really used to punctuate sort of certain parts, certain sections, etc., every now and again, it doesn't matter that they're a bit loud at this stage, that's kind of okay. Now the whole kick for the breakdown section, again, there's no point really kind of cycling around much stuff. We just want to hear that this kind of works in the lead up to the breakdown. So that should probably be a bit bigger, really, a bit bigger sounding. Now again, because this has probably been normalized, I'm going to take away 6 dB because I've got the resolution here on my fader, but it means that I can do some more additive EQ, and I'd normally do additive EQ in a slightly different way. By using a kind of higher end plugin, but in this instance it's not a hugely important sound in here. I just want to dirt this up and make it feel very grand and very big at the end of that kick sequence. Because it's a very stereo sound as well, I might add in that direction mixer and do the same trick by having the crossover set to 500 Hz, and everything below 500 Hz is going to be monoed. It's probably a little bit too high in terms of frequency. Yeah, that's a bit better. Go a bit more dirty with the kick, or the low end of it. High shelf to remove. To kind of tilt the EQ or tilt the design of it a touch. I'm not going to take that out of context, or out of solo mode to put it into context rather. That's quite good. It's quite dramatic sounding. I'm going to save this snare roll because it's going to need quite a bit of processing and some automation as it leads into the drop section. I'm just going to have a little listen to the drums as they sound at the moment. Yeah, I'm relatively happy with that at the moment. So before we move on to the next section, I'm going to just collapse down all of these submixes here, with the exception of the snare roll and the hall kick. Let's go into the mixer here, and I'm going to select the output channel plus these two, and I change the output here to bus 11, so that all of the submixes, all the snare submix, the hi-hat submix, top loop submix, etc., are all going to bus 11. And then over here, I can just colour that in, press Ctrl and T, and now I drag this all the way to the bottom below that snare roll. I've actually got a drum submix. Okay, so the drum mix is kind of quite good now. We've got everything grouped together and sort of submixed properly so that everything runs through that final auxiliary channel strip or bus down there. One of the things I want to return to and revisit is the idea of adding in a little localized reverb. So I'm going to use this auxiliary 12 here, and I'm just going to call this drums verb. I'm going to find it in the global mixer strip, Control T. I'm going to create a track of it so it's in here. I don't really want that to be in that submix per se. I just want that to be fed to there, and I want the output of the drums verb to go into the drum submix. So drum submix is bus 11. I want the output of this reverb going into bus 11. Doesn't matter that the numbers aren't sequential and they're kind of the wrong way around in that sense. That's not an issue. And because it's an effects channel, I'm going to use a pink track header for it in the same way that I did for the kick parallel compression up here. And I'm going to add in some plate reverb. Go to third-party reverbs. I'm going to go to Valhalla plate. And I'm going to go back to the clap track that is going to it. I'm going to solo this a sec. And at the end of the reverb signal chain, even though we might not be able to see it or hear it particularly at this stage, I'm going to make sure there's no low frequencies that come out after that reverb. Might add a tiny bit to the snare as well. Pull the clap one down there. And for things like the ride, I might add a bit too. Just add a tiny bit of width. Not much, just a subtle amount there. And the same for the top two percussion layers as well. I'm going to add the shaper box to the drum reverb auxiliary here, so the returns from that reverb are going to pump in time with the music as well. I might even add in a bit of distortion and overdrive. Going into the reverb as well. So there, the drums dry. There, those top loops wet. So there it is dry again. There it is wet, and let's hear it all together. And finally, I might add a little bit of processing to the drum submix. Might add a little bit of bus compression. Use the SSL comp here, the classic one. Actually, I might use the glue, which is a model of it, which I quite like. might sidechain the sidechain input in here so that the kick isn't constantly triggering it the whole time. Just gluing it together a tiny bit. And to finish off, I might add in a vintage EQ. I go for the console EQ, so this is based on a Neve, and just add a couple of dBs of low end with the shelf starting starting at around 80 Hertz, which I can't seem to tap in. There we go, somewhere around that. And those have kind of warmed up the sound a touch. And at this stage I'm relatively happy with the drums. They're kind of bouncing around, but I think the real test will be when we start adding in the bass in the next tutorial.